Hey guys, welcome to the Family Movie Night podcast where we review movies based on their family friendliness. My name's Caroline Morris and I'm joined by my husband Tim Morris, and today we are reviewing the Pixar film Inside Out. Tim, why don't you paint a picture for us here? Give us a little synopsis.
I would love to. Yeah, the synopsis of Inside Out, the 2015 film directed by the legendary Pixar director Pete Docter. According to the app Letterboxd, it says, when 11-year-old Riley moves to a new city, her emotions team up to help her through the transition. Joy, fear, anger, disgust, and sadness work together. But when joy and sadness get lost, they must journey through unfamiliar places to get back home. So, Caroline, this is, I know we leave personal opinions and reviews kind of towards the end, but of all the Pixar movies that are out there, and there's a lot and a lot of good ones, this one seems to rise to the top in a lot of people's lists.
I would argue that it might be one of the best, if not the best, Pixar movie.
That is a hot take. I mean, like we said, there are a lot of really good ones.
There are a lot of really good ones, and that might be a whole different podcast episode of its own. But yeah, I do love this movie. I think it's awesome.
Quite literally plays on your emotions.
It really does, which is part of the originality that I love about it. I think it's so creative.
Also, let's not skip past the fact that as we record this episode, the year is 2025, which means that Inside Out turns 10 years old.
That's actually wild to me. I'm really glad that you notated that, because that's actually really wild to me. I actually can't believe that it's been 10 years. I think it's one of those movies though that's gonna be around for a long time. Just like Toy Story, like sure. Lion King. I mean, which also, decades.
If we're gonna go down that route, 2025. Are you ready for this?
I don't think I am.
30 years since the original Toy Story.
That's painful.
30 years since the first Pixar feature film.
Such a good movie. I love that movie too. That one would be up there for me as well.
Absolutely.
It's
timeless.
One of the best. But
back to Inside Out.
Yeah, let's talk about this movie a little bit. To start us off, let's talk about violence and gore. Really none of that in this movie. I mean, there are a few small things that we need to maybe address for a few select people out there. But yeah, what about violence and gore? You got anything?
The very first thing we put in the violence gore category is when Riley, she and her family move to this new city, into this new house. They walk into the new house, and on the floor is a dead mouse.
Yeah.
So, again, kind of silly.
But it's a dead animal. Some kids are sensitive to that.
Right. Just want to make you aware. Yeah. Hey, it's there. And it does actually come back later on in the film.
Yes.
In a dream-like sequence. Mm-hmm. Riley is having a dream, and the dead mouse does kind of pop back up and kind of...
As a nightmare.
And says a little line to her and then falls over dead again. So it is a little more than just one little shot at the beginning of the film.
Right. I think it's things like that would keep this movie from being rated G versus P. That would keep it rated PG versus G, if that makes sense.
Right.
Another thing actually on the animal front is there is a scene where they're in this place called Dreamland, and it's basically where they are projecting and creating dreams for Riley to have at night. And one of them, there is a dog, an obviously animated dog, that is cut in half. It doesn't die; it stays alive, even though it's cut in half. But it does show some innards of the dog. So I wanted to notate that as well.
I do want to give a little context to that because I think it's important.
Right.
They're in this dreamland, which is a metaphor for Hollywood. It's like they are on a soundstage and they're putting on a film that is what Riley sees as her dream. And two of the main characters, Joy and Sadness, are in a dog costume, and they have these reality filters on their camera, so it makes it look like it's a funny way of making it, because like some things in our dreams are so crazy, but they feel so real to us, and that's the kind of the joke, is that they're putting on this funny little film as a dream, but they put on this filter, and Riley sees it as real. And so Joy and Sadness are in a dog costume, kind of one's the front, one's the back. But via the dream filter, it looks like a real dog, and their costume gets split up.
Yeah, it's not like a family dog that gets cut in half. It's not like
there's a dream of a dog getting like a saw down
that's
true.
I
just think that's important to know, because yes, we do see the virtual reality dog in half, and it shows a little very cartoony insides of the dog. But I just think it's important to know a little bit more of the context. It's not why the dog is in half,
We've spent a lot of time on the dog.
It's really not that big of a deal.
And that's our last thing in the violence and gore category. So
we just really want you to be aware, okay?
It really left a lasting impression, apparently.
See, clearly, it left an impression on us. Maybe it'll leave an impression on our kids, too.
That is so funny. So no language in this movie. Moving on to the next category. There's no language. I will say the character Anger does talk about wanting to use the one cuss word that he does know, which I think is funny. But they do talk about, obviously, they talk about curse words without actually using them. So that's actually mentioned twice. He mentions that twice in the movie. And then at the end, they like beep over non-existent curse words as kind of like a funny, funny joke.
It's like the Anger character is going to say the curse word, and then another character hits a button that has that censored
bleeps
beep.
It out. Yeah.
So it's a funny moment. There's no, like she said, there's no actual curse words in it.
For sure. There's no substance abuse or no substance usage at all in this movie. There is one thing that I don't like. I personally don't like this. I think it's very unnecessary, but you need to know is that pretty early on they show baby Riley running around naked and they show her bare butt. I don't know. I feel I'm not like, that's just not my humor. And I don't know if they thought it was funny or not. I personally feel like this was the one knock that I really have on this movie that I'm like, that's completely unnecessary to show a naked butt on a kid's movie. It's unnecessary in my opinion.
It does. It seems like a risk that's not worth the reward.
Yeah, for sure.
And again, you may be watching this and think that's not a risk. Like that's,
right.
Who cares?
It's just not in every movie that you're seeing a naked butt.
Right. Especially if you're not expecting it. And it's a kid. It's a tiny little
It's a little
kid.
like toddler.
It's not like an adult butt.
But still.
It's
a butt.
A butt's a butt.
A butt. A butt is a butt.
If you get anything from this podcast.
Two things. The dog and the butt.
The dog and the butt.
Let's move on to the relationship category because this is actually probably our biggest category.
Yes.
And there's a lot to talk about here. Obviously, we're talking about emotions. We're talking about a preteen that's probably having a lot of emotions that they don't really know where to put. Why don't you talk about this category a little bit?
Yeah, this is where this movie thrives.
Totally.
Honestly. I just think that this movie does a really good job of capturing those elements that we all as humans have felt, which is probably why it's such a universally loved film for the most part.
Well, and they do a really good job of, playing off of how everybody has those emotions, and they show the mom and her version of those emotions, and they show the dad and his versions of those emotions. And so there's a lot of comic relief in that and just like the humanness of this movie.
Absolutely. But one of those is there are instances where Riley is disrespectful to her parents. Yeah. Where that anger emotion kind of comes in. And
a large part of the movie, the parts about like the joy, the joy character that brings Riley happiness and obviously joy is actually away from Riley for the majority part of this movie. So you have emotions that are not normally her main emotion now taking over the console. And so you have anger, you have disgust, and you have fear. And obviously a lot of things can come out of those being your main emotions. And so a lot of that is Riley just being disrespectful respectful to her parents, not showing up for school, deciding to run away, like a lot of things here that would maybe be good conversations to have with your kids after the fact of watching this movie together.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that the film does well too is it's not antagonizing any one of these emotions necessarily. Like anger, I know we've mentioned anger a couple times. Anger's not the bad guy. Anger's not the villain. It's just that when anger is the one that's driving, we see how Riley reacts.
Right.
And there are good parts of that. And, there's obviously bad parts because sometimes it may lead to disrespect or whatever. But it just, it shows how all of these different parts are what make up Riley.
Right.
And there are certain situations in which fear is necessary in certain situations where disgust is not necessary. They're all trying to do the best for Riley.
A couple things that end up happening as Riley kind of navigates how she feels about this time of transition. It shows, which I think is so cool, how they have they depicted basically Riley losing parts of herself. And as a result of a lot of that, Riley makes the decision, like I mentioned, to actually run away. Her parents are not obviously informed. She decides to steal her mom's credit card. She decides to skip school. She decides to walk the streets of San Francisco alone at night. She decides to ignore her mom's calls. She buys a bus ticket, gets on a bus with a bunch of strangers, and she's clearly the youngest one on the bus. And then finally, thankfully, she decides that this is a crazy thing that I'm doing here. What am I doing? And so finally gets off the bus and then returns to her family, where she ends up kind of having a reunion, but also just this release, I think, of a lot of pent up anger, a lot of pent up emotions, and ends up having a really beautiful moment with her family at the end. But these are all things that, obviously it's a kids movie, so things are tied in a nice bow at the end. But these could potentially be real life scenarios. I mean, my mom even has like a funny story of whenever she was a kid, how she like threatened her parents to move away, and packed her suitcase and went to the front door, and so these kinds of ideas and really creative, imaginative ideas that kids can have can be really real. And so I just think that's something that's important for you to know, especially for the younger ones, to maybe talk about this and like why that wasn't the wisest and best decision for Riley to make. Right. And the best way to handle her emotions.
Absolutely. And that's definitely the darkest part of the film.
Yeah. Not
Not only thematically, but literally, like, the clouds are gray and it's it's not necessarily rainy, but it's a darker, everything that they do with, the color of the film, and it's just the music, it just builds up. It's clearly an intense portion of the film.
Is there anything else in this section on relationships? I mean, there's a lot of relationships happening.
Yeah, this one's an interesting movie to review in the way that we're reviewing it, because it's like so built around the emotions and the interrelationships with people and the characters and stuff. It's kind of, like we had a very thin other categories here, right? This one is a little bit more ethereal. It's a little bit more thematic in our review than it is like there is, a cuss word, there is a fist fight, whatever, like. And so, like, I think that this is just maybe a little bit different of a review than we will do in a lot of our other episodes. And, just going off of that, one of the things that is beautiful about this film is that we see how even the interrelationships of the characters all work together to make up who Riley is. And Joy, who is our main protagonist, she's always happy. She's always wanting Riley to be happy. She's the positivity. She's the spunk. She's the fun. We think we just naturally see her as the leader in this film, and that, everything should be as Joy wants it to be. And then you have Sadness, who kind of starts out as the antagonist of the film. Just, again, by no fault of her own, but she just naturally makes things a little bit sad. And so by the end of the film, though, we see that Riley's memories are not monolithic. It's not just a memory of joy. It's not just a memory of fear. There are multiple emotions that work together to create this memory. Specifically at the end of the film, Joy has this memory of Riley's where she is being lifted up on the shoulders of her hockey teammates, and her parents are there and everybody's cheering, and it's a great memory. But what she didn't realize is you reverse that memory, go back a few minutes, and in the same memory, same time spot, Riley was sitting on a tree branch crying, and her parents trying to console her because she had just missed the game-winning shot of her hockey championship game or whatever. And so there was sadness involved, but it was because of that sadness that her teammates rallied around her and cheered her on and created a happy memory. So it wasn't just joy making a happy memory. It was the sadness and, that experience of failure that led to her teammates coming around her and creating a joyful memory. And so it just shows how there's this duality to us as humans. And it's, and I know I feel like we're getting so philosophical here, but these are just examples of great themes and conversation starters to have with your kids. And hey, it's okay to be sad, like you mentioned when she finally comes home after deciding not to run away, she kind of has a moment where she just breaks down and she cries and she just explains to her parents, I'm sad, I miss my home. I miss my friends. I'm in a new city. Like I'm trying to keep it all together, but I'm sad. And so it just really paints a picture to kids that it's okay to feel these things, like, yeah, you're going to be sad. You're going to be angry. You're going to be joyful. You're going to, you're going to have times where all of these emotions come into play, and it's okay to feel all those things.
There's just a lot of opportunity, I think, kind of what you're saying, where you can hold sadness and you can hold joy in the same hand. You can have both at the same time. And a lot of times actually sadness can help us move into joy, kind of what you're saying too. And there's one part in particular that I had to bring up because I loved it so much. But there's a character called Bing Bong, and it's an imaginary character that Riley has created from her childhood, but ultimately gets forgotten. Bing Bong sacrifices himself so that joy can make it back to Riley, and so that Riley can have joy again. And because he sacrifices himself, that means that Riley will never remember him again, which is kind of sad. And you really learn to love that character. But earlier in the movie, the part that I loved as well, also with Bing Bong, was that he was grieving the fact that Riley was forgetting him. And it was just a really sweet moment because Joy kind of was over there being like, oh, it's okay. Riley won't forget you. Like trying to be positive, trying to be that friend that's like, miss optimistic. And then you have really the first moment that you see goodness come out of sadness, and sadness just goes over and sits by Bing Bong and just being herself and says, I'm really sorry that's happening to you. I'm really sorry. And anyway, I just kind of love that's just a reminder that sometimes feeling sadness is exactly what you need to be able to move on and eventually experience joy again. The other thing I want to notate too, just about a good theme, was at the end, whenever Riley does decide not to run away and she comes home to her parents, I thought her parents handled it really well, because her dad says, I miss it too. I miss home too. And it kind of made Riley feel like, oh, I'm not the only one who's been feeling this way. And I think that's a lot of times whenever we end up making our big mistakes in life, it's out of the mentality of I'm the only one experiencing this, or if I'm reacting out of a big emotion, I'm the only one that's feeling this way. And usually that's not the truth. Usually we're not alone in that. And so I just thought that was a good moment to notate his parents, and a good little takeaway. I watch movies differently now that I'm a parent.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I'm like looking for parental themes and takeaways.
I do think, this film, kind of like you were talking about how we see them react, is a good, reminder to parents, or good like advice to parents about like, hey, sometimes as parents, we feel like we have to be the ones to keep things all together, and we can't experience our full emotions in front of our kids.
Yeah.
When really that probably is more detrimental to them. They need to see us and our example of us experiencing emotions as a human, and that it's okay to feel the gamut of emotions. And that when they mess up, even if it's in a really big way, like running away, that, we try to understand where they're coming from and why, and know that we feel those things too. And that there is a time and place for all of the different emotions when it comes to parenting. It's a very thought-provoking film for a children's animated Pixar movie.
Which is why I love it. I think it's one of the best out there that is both for parents and kids, for that reason that we're talking about.
Absolutely, yeah. And one thing, too, we like to mention like the target audience for this. And I think you have probably picked it up through this conversation, but obviously it's a children's film, but it really is one of those that can be for anybody.
For sure.
I know a lot of kids' films like to throw in a little joke or two that's for the parents,
Right.
That joke is for the parents, or the kids aren't going to pick up on it, but the parents will think it's funny because they're having to sit there and watch the movie. And this movie really doesn't have that because the whole film can be for the parents
For
too.
sure.
It's not one that just, I got to go sit through so Junior can watch it and maybe they'll throw me a bone. It really is, no matter your age, something that we can all relate to, something that you can enjoy.
For sure. Well, we've kind of already given our personal review on the movie, which is 5 stars. Fantastic. We love it. Based on its family friendliness, what would you give it out of a 5-star rating?
I would give it a 5.
Yeah.
I'd give it a 5 out of 5. I think any kid, now obviously maybe your real younger ones aren't going to understand all of the themes and the plot devices and all that kind of stuff going on, but there's nothing, in my personal opinion, in this movie that I can't plop my toddler down and let him watch and be worried about anything.
See, it's funny. This has kind of already been the section that we've disagreed on the most. I do think it's generally a very family-friendly movie. I would probably give it a 4 out of 5, maybe a 4.5 out of 5. The only thing for me that I think of as a parent is exposing a really young child to even the idea or the option that you have to run away. That's the only one for me that I'm like, if you give this too young to a kid and they start thinking of the idea of running away and knowing that that's an option out there, they might actually move forward with it. And being too young, like that would just, I don't know. There's just something about that I would maybe knock off a half of a star for that. So that may just be something that you want to.
That's fair. I think I was just coming from it like with our son who is to like,
I'm
he's not
thinking
gonna
of
pick
like
up
a
on
6-year-old, a 7-year-old.
Yes, like you said, there is a gap when they are going to start understanding it.
Yeah, for sure.
More.
But they will not understand the implications of actually moving forward with that. So, age appropriate rating, I think PG is absolutely perfect.
Yep.
And pure entertainment rating.
It's got to be 5 out of 5.
Really?
It's got to be.
For you?
Oh, yes.
But in our last episode, you were saying that you're stingy with the 5 out of 5.
I am stingy.
And this one's worth it
This
to
one's
you.
a 5.
We're already hitting a 5-star rating from Tim Morris on the 2nd episode of this podcast. That's a big deal.
It is. It is. It is a masterclass in storytelling.
Okay. Well, I also did that and give it a 5-star rating. Tim, why don't you tell people where they can find us? The Family Movie Night Podcast. I almost forgot the name of our podcast. It's so new.
I know, right? Well, we are on all the platforms. You can
all of them.
You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, of course, YouTube, Family Movie Nights. We are on Instagram and TikTok. We will have specific handles and links and all that kind of stuff in the description and show notes below. So please check us out. Like, follow, all that good
and
thing.
Tell your friends about us. This word of mouth is the way to go these days. Let me tell you. Forget the sharing on Instagram. Tell your friends. Word of mouth, face to face.
We will be happy to meet them in the podcast land.
Thank you guys so much for joining Family Movie Night Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be coming out with our next episode very soon, so stay tuned.